Okay, hi, I'm back. Um, so, okay, so first of all, the first metaphysics exercise is due tonight, so I hope everyone's like up on that. How do okay, um, yeah, are there any questions about any other questions about that or anything else about the course or? Okay, then I'm gonna continue talking about abstraction. So I don't know. Very few people attended the Zoom sessions. I mean, there's not very many people here in person right now either, but which is uh, attendance doesn't usually fall off this quickly, but maybe it was like me not being here for a week is really, I don't know. Anyway, Um, so, but I'm gonna just keep talking as if you've seen the YouTube recordings at least. All right. So, um, right. So what I was talking about last night was abstraction. Uh, and I'm gonna go over it again, kind of from the beginning, but going much quickly over some things that I spent a long time ago talking about before. So, right. So um, the key background to understanding abstraction, I think, is um, number one, this point that every idea comes along with the idea of existence. Now, I mean, uh, like Berkeley is going to deny that there's such thing as the idea of existence, and it is kind of weird. But this is the thought that somehow, like, if I have an idea A, it's always comes connected to this other idea, the idea of existence, E. Um, um, and what I was what I was emphasizing last night when I talked about this is that this idea of existence is always existence at a time. And in the case of external things, at least, it's always existence at a time and place. Um, um, Now, I want to expand on that slightly because um, there's something confusing about this. So first of all, let me draw in the external object of the idea A, and I'll call that small a. Right? So again, like the operation of the mental operation, uh, is somewhere up here, and it has this idea as its immediate object. And then by way of this idea, it has this external thing, small a, as its object. So, so when Locke actually talks about this, this is book 2, chapter 7, section 7, I believe. I'm just remembering that by heart, so I might be wrong. Uh, and my book is falling apart. There's another issue. Uh, oh, yeah, here it is. It's on this page. So, um, ex existence and unity are two other ideas that are suggested to the understanding by every object without and every idea within. So, right, this is, and well, maybe I'll read the next sentence too. Where when ideas are in our minds, we consider them as being actually there, as well as we consider things to be actually without us, which is that they exist or have existence. So somehow, well, I mean, there's a lot of different possible ways of understanding what's going on here. I'm gonna just focus on the one I think is right. Uh, but I mean, I guess I could say, like, how many ideas of existence are there? and how does this idea of existence, because remember, he's saying both the idea and the external thing exist. Is there like one idea of existence for the existence of the idea and another for the existence of the external thing? So, I mean, I think the answer is no. I mean, that's what it said. That definitely from that paragraph that I just read, it pretty much sounds like there's one idea of existence and it's somehow doing both of these things. So, but now when I say this idea of existence is existence at a time, well, in the case of the idea, its connection with existence is pretty straightforward. When I'm perceiving the idea now exists. And as Locke says elsewhere, I think that was in that quote from about memory that I read last night. That's the only time the idea exists. Yeah, right. That was the thing about memory, right? Remember how he was saying that it's not really true that, sorry, it's the only time the idea exists. I have to point to the right thing, right? He says it's not really true that when I remember something, the idea is somehow stored in my mind, but I'm not perceiving it, right? He says ideas only exist when they're being perceived. That's something that Locke and Berkeley agree about, and that Hume is gonna at least complicate. All right. So anyway, so as far as the idea goes, the fact that it always comes with the idea of existence means like whenever I perceive it, it exists at that time. But what about the external object? So like if this connection of the idea with existence always meant that its object always exists now when I'm perceiving the idea, then that would mean that anything I think of exists, right? Like any idea I entertain exists, the object of it exists at that time. And that's, I mean, especially when we come to complex ideas, that's certainly not true, right? Like I can form the idea of a unicorn, and a unicorn doesn't exist now and actually has never existed and presumably will never exist, although who knows? So, right. So, so in what sense, if A is the idea unicorn, then in what sense does it come together with existence? So that is, in what sense does this existence attach to its object, I guess is the point, right? I was just talking about how this existence attaches to the idea itself, and that's straightforward. But how does it attach to its object? So, I mean, I think in general, if you like, so I was talking last night about the case of simple ideas, and the case of simple ideas is special because the mind can't make its own simple ideas. So the simple idea has to have come from an actual object, external object at some point, right? But with complex ideas, that's not true. And so like at what time does this idea attribute existence to its object, I guess, is the question. And I think the answer is, in general, at no particular time. Right? That is, the idea A comes with existence. That means the idea A itself exists now, and its object A possibly exists at some time, but it's completely indeterminate which. Right. So having the idea of a unicorn means, I mean, if this were Spinoza, if this were last quarter and we were talking about Spinoza, we would have to say the unicorn actually exists at some time. right? Like, because everything possible is actual. But Locke doesn't think that, right? So when I say that my idea of a unicorn is the idea of an existing unicorn, I have to mean like a possibly existing unicorn. And possibly existing means existing possibly at some time, but there's no further specification of what time that is. Okay, so like that much is always true of every idea. It always presents itself as the idea itself as existing now and its object as possibly existing at some indeterminate time. But and so like this in that sense, this idea of existence necessarily goes with the idea, right? This is almost like the idea of a triangle and the idea of its angles adding up to two right angles. That there's like a necessary connection between these ideas. But I mean, that doesn't mean that either the idea A or its object necessarily exists. It means the idea necessarily exists when it's being perceived. And it means the object like could exist. But in some cases, and in particular in the case of perception, well, I guess I should say, see, I used to call this perception, but now I think that's a wrong understanding of what Locke means by perception. In the case of sensation, the there's like a further connection between the idea and existence, which is not necessary. It's contingent, right? Like its object needn't exist when the idea exists. But if I'm getting the idea right now from sensation, then the object exists now. And so again, this is in the case of an idea like unicorn, this is contingent in the sense that in the case of an idea like unicorn, there is no time whatsoever at which, no determinate time at which its object actually exists. In the case of a simple idea, however, either it has to actually exist, its object has to actually exist now, and that's sensation, or it has to have existed at some determinate past time, and that's memory. Right? Again, because the mind can't make its own new simple ideas. So if this is a simple idea, then and it has this contingent connection to existence, right? That it not only possibly exists, but it actually exists. Well, no, sorry, I'm getting out of, if it's a simple idea, then it has to have that contingent connection with respect to some determinate time. There has to be a time at which the object actually of the idea actually exists or existed. It presumably has to be now or in the past, right? That's we don't have memory going the other direction. Right? We don't have memory going into the future. So it has to be a determinate either now or some determinate time in the past. And like we may not know what determinate time that is in terms of like other markers, right? Like that is, we may not be able to point out what date that was on the calendar, or like, where the sun was in the sky or whatever when that happened. But we know that there was a time when that happened. Now, I mean, this brings up a question: how do we know the mind can't make its own simple ideas? I mean, like, which comes first? Because again, like that's Locke's empiricism, and the question is, so we can't know that by experience. Uh, and the question is, how do we know that? Um, but um, because sometimes Locke talks as if, right? He says, just look at all of your ideas and try to find one that didn't come from sensation, or a simple idea that didn't come from sensation. But that's not very um, that's not a very useful argument, because now if I claim to have an idea that didn't come from sensation, then right away I'm claiming there's an exception to his rule. So, and he has no argument against me. Um, so, I mean, I feel like Locke thinks it's more than just, test every idea and see. That you can see somehow by the way the ideas are related to the idea of existence, that there must have been a determinate time when a simple idea first came into the mind. And at that time, because sensation is a passive faculty, there must have been an object that was acting on me. Okay, so I mean, this is true for simple ideas. It's also true, and I'm getting ahead of myself because we haven't discussed the classification of complex ideas yet, and that's what I'm planning to talk about right after I finish talking about abstraction. But what Locke calls the idea of a substance. So the idea of a substance is the idea of certain qualities um, being necessarily connected in a certain subject. Um, that is, they belong together in a certain subject, and there's a subject of a certain kind that requires all these qualities. That's I'll talk about more when we get to the classification of complex ideas, hopefully soon. But the point is, so the idea of a substance, um, Locke is going to say, like, the point of ideas of substance is to like accurately represent what qualities really go together in the world, right? So like the idea horse would be an example of an idea of substance. And it's a useful idea of substance because the various qualities that we combine to make the idea of horse really do go together. And that's how we got the idea. So like a legitimate or useful idea of substances is going to also be like a simple idea in the sense that at some time we actually did get these ideas together. So there was an object that caused them all together. Um, but we could also form ideas of substance like unicorn or chimera, where we just put the ideas together and then kind of thought, and there could be something that makes all these ideas go together. That would be the unicorn or the chimera. But since we've never seen anything like that, this idea is not like useful. It's not legitimate in some sense. So I guess I would say like simple ideas and legitimate ideas of substance have this in common, that their object must have existed at some determinate time. Okay, so I don't know if that was really much faster than I talked about it last night. It was differently organized. I don't know if it was more confusing or less confusing. Like when something is really abstract, I try to understand it by getting even more abstract. And I know that not all people find that helpful. But this is an example of that. So, because I'm trying to get rid of the distracting, like, ways we're picturing things that, that are getting in the way here. But arguably that was the only part I understood, and now what I'm left with is incomprehensible. But in any case, all right. So this is all to set the stage for the question of how abstraction works. And like, first of all, is how you might think abstraction works. I think this is the thing I didn't explain, like I just kind of said in passing when I was talking about this last night. Here's how you might think it works. You know, so here you have this snowball Fred. And right, like this is the idea of Fred. So, and up here's my mind. Right. So the idea of Fred, I mean, I drew it as a dot, but I shouldn't. It's a complex idea. Right? The idea of Fred contains lots of stuff. It doesn't presumably contain an idea corresponding to every quality of Fred. I mean, it couldn't, right? Because I don't know all the qualities of Fred. I mean, you know, especially, I don't know all the powers that Fred can exercise on other bodies. I mean, I think Locke focuses on this a lot. He's remembering his work in chemistry, that at least at the time, and I mean, I think this is not so true now, or maybe not true at all now, which shows that we're in a different situation than Locke was. But that, you know, there was no way of predicting how two chemicals would react. You had to like mix them to find out. Right. So like there's an infinite number of tests you could do on Fred to see how he would affect other stuff. So, and I obviously haven't done all of them, right? So like, but nevertheless, I've combined a lot of ideas corresponding to a lot of different qualities of Fred. Fred is round, Fred is has this bulk, has this figure, has this color, right? I put all those together to get my idea of Fred. Now you might think, and like similarly, here's the other. I don't know where I came up with these names, but for snowballs, but that's their names. All right, so like here's the idea of Delilah, and so it's also a complex idea. Not all its components are found in the idea of Fred or vice versa, right? Like they may be different sizes. Yeah, I should draw clearly different sizes. They may be different sizes. They, you know, they may be slightly different shapes. A snowball isn't a perfect sphere, obviously, you know, etc. Right? There's various differences between them. But they have some ideas in common. They're both white, they're both round, they're both roughly spherical. I'm not sure exactly how Locke would analyze the idea of roughly spherical, but in any case, right, they have lots of things in common. So like you might think the way I get the abstract idea snowball is that I look at a bunch of these ideas of individual snowballs. I leave out all the things that they don't have in common and keep only the ones that they do have in common. And that's my idea of snowball. That is, of a snowball in general. I did talk about this, I think, last week, but now I'm bringing back a new picture. Right. So that is, so these are particular ideas. Yeah.
That question.
Yeah.
Mind the idea and the object of the idea. Do all the different minds only relate to the one idea and then they all share the object? Or is it the object of the idea of the specific mind?
It's definitely the idea of the specific mind, according to Locke. Yeah.
Okay, so the lowercase a is only for the mind that is perceiving the idea.
Yeah, I mean, Locke thinks of ideas, of every idea as being in some particular mind. Right? He doesn't talk about ideas being simultaneously in different minds. I think he thinks that's impossible.
But if there's two minds that are both seeing threat,
They're not going to have the same idea necessarily.
both different ideas and both different objects, like in the way that we draw it like that.
Well, okay. I mean, this is a good question. I mean, so we're going to hear a lot more about this when Locke talks about words and communication, right? Like what happens when two people use the same word but don't associate exactly the same idea with it. But the question, is it the same object? I mean, so remember I said there's different ways of answering the question, what is the object, right? Like it may be the same snowball that's affecting both of them, but it's like it's different qualities and operations in that same snowball that are affecting one mind versus the other, and that's why they have different ideas. I guess the question of whether it's the same object depends on how you look at, how narrowly you define the object. But I mean, there's something in common between them, right? Like the snowball is external to both minds and is just sitting there. Whether you want to call that the object of the act or not, there's something that the two minds have in common. But all right. So anyway, so getting back to this is so this is all going on within one mind. And this may be an infant who's like first developing the power of abstraction. Maybe this is the first abstract idea they formed. So, right, so they've seen lots of snowballs, and now they compare the ideas of the different snowballs. Right, like first of all, they use their memory, they use their discernment, and they use comparison, and they see that these ideas have some things in common and are different in other ways. And the next step is to subtract all the ways they're different and keep only the ones that are the same. And so the difference between concrete, it should be concrete, but it's not particular. So, right, the difference between particular ideas and abstract general ideas is that, like, to form an abstract idea, I've taken some of the ideas out of the particular idea. Now, I mean, I think there's some truth to this in the sense that if you have different abstract idea, or if you have one abstract idea and you want to form another one that's more general, so all the abstract ideas are general. As I said before, sometimes he calls them abstract general ideas, sometimes he calls them general ideas, right? So like if you have one abstract general idea and you want to make another one that's more general, then you do that by leaving out some of the components of that complex idea, right? So, like if you have the idea of human and the idea of horse, and here's the idea of human and here's the idea of horse, and well, maybe I shouldn't call it human or horse, because these are general ideas, right? I don't know how to draw this. I guess I should draw lots of horses. Right, just like in a diagram, I sometimes draw later. There's one idea of horse, and there's many particular horses that conform to it, that it refers to. And similarly over here, we have many different humans under the general idea, abstract general idea of human. Now, like I can compare these two ideas and I can find out what they have in common and isolate just that. And, I'll form another idea, like perhaps the idea of animal or the idea of mammal, or some kind of some more general idea. And I do that by leaving out some of the ideas contained in both of these. So in other words, this theory I think is right when we're like within the realm of abstract ideas and we're asking, how do we get more generality? But the question we're interested in is, how do we get from a particular idea to an abstract idea in the first place, right? Like, what's the difference? you can think of that as a kind of difference in generality, right? That this only applies to one thing, and this applies to lots of things. Um, I think actually that would be wrong. And Locke is somewhat clear about this. For example, he talks about the sun and how there's only one of them. But we can form an abstract idea of sun, which it applies to the sun and anything else like that. And then he says, and they are not without their reasons who think that stars actually are other suns, right? Which, is what I mean, presumably is what Locke himself already thought then, and certainly what we think now, right? So maybe that's not as good an example as it could have been. But it's a traditional example because Aristotelians thought there was definitely only one sun, right? But nevertheless, you could form an abstract idea that the sun falls under, and anything else like that, only there isn't anything else like that, would also fall under, right? So like, that is the fact that an abstract general idea only includes one thing doesn't make it particular. So what does make it particular? And this is the official a description of it in the paragraph about abstraction in book 2, chapter 11. So it's book 2, chapter 11, section 9 on page 155. The mind makes the particular ideas received from particular objects to become general, which is done by considering them as they are in the mind such appearances, separate from all other existences, and the circumstances of real existence as time, place, or any other concomitant ideas. That is, the only idea we're subtracting, so to speak, is this one. Right? We're disengaging the idea from and but now that I drew this picture a more complicated, or at least talked about it in a more complicated way, you can see in what sense we're doing that and in what sense we're not. I mean, we're still left with the idea itself existing now. We're still left with the object existing possibly at some indeterminate time. So like, this isn't an exception to the rule that every idea comes together with existence. Every idea always comes together with the idea of existence. What we're subtracting is that contingent connection between the idea and existence, which, so to speak, claims that the object exists at some determinate time and place. Right? So like here in the case of Fred, I don't need another snowball to take this step. All I have to do is separate my idea of Fred from the determinate time and place at which I encountered Fred, right? Which could be now in the case of sensation, or it could be some past time in the case of memory. And now, even though this idea is just as complicated as it was before, it's now abstract. Right? Because again, even if there only ever has been and only ever will be one object that actually has all the qualities that this idea represents, so that object has to be, that thing has to exist at some determinate time and place. But this idea no longer, the new idea no longer refers to that determinate time and place. So now there could be, right? Just as there could be unicorns at some time, who knows when, right? There could be other snowballs identical to Fred at other times and places, even if really there aren't. Right? And that is this idea now only, like the idea of unicorn, represents its object as possibly existing at some indeterminate time. Some people are looking really unhappy about this. Are there any questions? Yeah.
And actually, I'm more sure of Fred, like, is Fred's existence like at that place and at that time, so how would it be possible that like any other snowball would be identical to Fred in another place or time if that's not existing in Fred's place and time?
Right. Well, I mean, it would, so it depends what you mean by identical, right? I mean, yeah, it wouldn't be numerically identical. It wouldn't be Fred. Um, but it could have all the same qualities that Fred has, right? Like all the same powers to cause me to perceive ideas that Fred has. So if Fred is a certain size and shape and a certain shade of white and a certain temperature and a certain, like all the details of that, that would all have to do with these qualities that Fred has, that is these powers to cause me to perceive things. So even like, as I said, it may be, as in the case of the Aristotelians and the sun, it may be that there never has been and never will be another thing that has exactly those qualities. But when I remove from this idea the connection to that determinate time and place, right? Considering them as they are in the mind, such appearances, separate from all other existences and the circumstances of real existence as time, place, or any other concomitant ideas. So, right, like I take a look at what ideas are in this complex idea, and I think of them by themselves without connecting them to this time and place. And now this other hypothetical snowball that has all the same qualities would also fall under, I mean, it's no longer the idea of Fred, right? Now it's the idea of a snowball that looks and feels, etc., exactly like Fred. You're still unhappy.
No. I guess like I don't know. Like if I have like magic powers, like and I can like see through Fred and I see like all the chemicals and everything and all of Fred's like molecules. And like I like that is my idea of Fred. I don't know. I don't know what the question is actually.
I mean, there is a good question. There are, so I mean, like, so one question is, what is this property of existing at some particular time and place? I mean, it's not a separate quality in Fred. I mean, it couldn't be, right? Like these qualities, of course, exist at the time and place where their subject is. They don't act somewhere else. So, like, it's not like Fred also has a quality of existing at this time and place. But so, so what is that? Some kind of relation between Fred and me? I mean, it definitely involves some kind of relation between Fred and me, but I guess what I'm claiming, that's why I talked about this, is that the way my idea represents that is not by its internal composition, but by the way it's connected to this other idea of existence. And when I change that connection, all the component ideas stay the same. So all the qualities that would cause them stay the same. but it no longer represents something at being at a certain place in time. So, and even if as in your like imagination, so I think Locke thinks this is really impossible. But suppose we actually knew all the qualities of Fred and formed an idea of Fred that contained the ideas corresponding to all those qualities. If it didn't further pin Fred to a certain determinate time and place, it would still be abstract. Because again, like none of these qualities has a connection to any particular time and place.
But it's like one of the qualities that it's existing, but they're not having place.
Well, so that's what I was saying. I don't think that can't be a quality, right? That is, a quality is a power that the thing has to act.
I guess what I mean when like, as like time is passing like that, like the existence is like having an effect on the Fred, like the time passing on Fred.
Yeah, so so these qualities are powers, and they pass into acts, that is, they operate when circumstances are right. So, Fred has the power to cause me to see white, but Fred is only going to actually cause me to see white if, like, Fred is right now a certain distance from me, and etc. Right? So, but when I'm talking about this other possible snowball that has the same qualities, it has all the same powers to cause me to see white, and it would also cause me to see white if the conditions were right. So, I mean, so you can't add that the conditions are right as another one of the qualities. Right, this would be the power to cause me to think that Fred perceive that Fred is at this time and place. And then, you would say, oh, and there could be another snowball with that power to cause me to, but it couldn't. I mean, the power, am I thinking about this right? This, I guess, put it this way, this quality here would be the quality of existence, basically. Right? That is, on this model, Fred, would have two qualities. One, I don't know how to write the quality here. We use uppercase and lowercase. I'll call it alpha, right? So it had a quality, Fred had a quality alpha that caused me to perceive A. And Fred also had a quality epsilon that caused me to perceive E. And everything has a property epsilon. Because every time I perceive anything, it causes me to perceive E. But then why there can't be a power like this? Well, I mean, I guess because it's the right thing to say. I think this is true, but I don't know if it's the right thing to say. I guess because, like, remember, every idea always comes together with E. So, like, if I'm thinking of this later when I'm not perceiving it anymore, I get E again. And even if it's the idea of unicorn that I've never perceived, E comes with it. So, but no, maybe that's not. I mean, like, there's pretty strong arguments about this in Hume, but I don't see them in Locke, so I should probably. Like, Hume says, if existence were an idea that I could add to another complex idea, um, or I guess it exists. All right, I'm sorry, I'm getting confused by this question. It's too good. Anyway, so yeah, maybe I'm not going to try to prove it now. I'm just going to say, in answer to your question, that that's not Locke's picture, I think. Right? Locke doesn't think that there's both a quality of a-ness in this thing and a quality of existence in it. And that this quality of existence just happens to be everywhere. And that's why whenever I perceive something, I perceive it as existent, right? And whenever I imagine something, I also always add the E into it, even if it's something I've never seen. That's not the way he thinks about it at all. Existence means like the thing only has any qualities that can do anything if it exists. That's right. That's actually the cogito argument from Descartes. Right? Like if I'm thinking, I must exist. Right. So like if existence were really another quality, that would be I guess to put it this way, imagine taking the quality of existence away. Now we have something that only has this quality. But wait, it doesn't exist. Right. I mean, maybe that's the best way to get at this. And I have to go on to something else, obviously. But maybe that's the best way to get us to point out that, like, to have any quality at all, something has to exist. So, and it has to exist at a particular time and place. So, existence at a particular time and place can't be another one of its qualities. Right? That is, existence is a presupposition for having quality, not a quality. Does that make you happier? Okay, all right, that's the best I can do for now. All right, let me go. All right, let me I mean, I should say this question of like like how transcendental ideas, that is ideas that come together with every other idea, like how they represent something in the object or whether they do and not is like um I mean, it's a question that exercises philosophy from like Plotinus through Kant, right? So it's not surprising that it's confusing. And also it's, there's reason to be suspicious that I'm somehow importing something, that I'm familiar with from Kant or whatever into Locke, and it's not really there. But anyway, this is what I think Locke is thinking. Okay, so all right, so back to my claim that no matter how complex this idea is, that is, no matter how many qualities of Fred it represents, now understanding that existence at a determinate time and place is not a quality, right? So no matter how many qualities of Fred it contains, I can still make it into an abstract idea, just not by taking away one of those ideas that's in it, but just by taking away that connection to a determinate time and place. And this explains the paradox that I pointed out sometime back, or kind of paradox in book 1, chapter 2, section 15. So this is on page 65, where he's talking about what ideas infants first get. And at the beginning of the paragraph, he says, the senses at first let in particular ideas and furnish the yet empty cabinet. And the mind by degrees growing familiar with some of them, they are lodged in the memory and names got to them. Afterwards, the mind proceeding further abstracts them and by degrees learns the use of general names. Right, so so far the claim is that the infant first gets particular ideas. So, like mom, my older daughter, the first word she learned was mama, and the second word she learned was kitty, and the third word she learned was butt bomb. And then she learned dad. All right. So anyway, but presumably, like according to Locke, at that point, when she was just beginning to acquire language, Locke would say she probably doesn't have general names. So by kitty, she means like this cat. And by butt bomb, she means this bright yellow tube of butt bomb. And right. So that particular ideas are what she gets first. And then later, as and these two things happen together, according to Locke, basically. She acquires general names and abstract general ideas. So that's the beginning of the paragraph. Then further down, he says, this is the end of the paragraph, actually. For a child knows as certainly before it can speak the difference between the ideas of sweet and bitter. That is, that sweet is not bitter, as it knows afterwards when it comes to speak that wormwood and sugar plums are not the same thing. Right? Wormwood is something really bitter. I'm not even really sure what it is, but anyway, it's mentioned in the Bible a lot, but I don't know what it is really. Anyway, I should look it up in Wikipedia. So wormwood is something really bitter. Sugar plums is something really sweet. But the point, he describes the child at the beginning as knowing the difference between the ideas of sweet and bitter. So those are simple ideas. And then later, when it's able to talk, it knows the difference between sugar plums and wormwood. Those are complex ideas, right? So the ideas the child first got were particular and simple. And we expect the child first gets to be simple because remember, he talks about how like, even though the qualities are blended in the object, ideas come in simple and unmixed. And compounding is something that happens before abstraction, but that many beasts don't manage to do. Compounding is putting some ideas together to make a more complex idea. So, right, so, and I think I mean, with the original way of looking at it as abstraction, these seem contradictory. Right? Is it an idea with almost everything subtracted from it? That would be an abstract idea. Or is it an idea with almost everything left in? That would be a particular idea. Right? Again, if you think of abstraction as just taking the particular idea and removing some characteristics from it. But I think on the way I just explained the way abstraction works, you can say, no, they're simple particular ideas. That's what the infant first gets. So it's like, and this is before acquiring language, presumably. So that's what he actually says in that sentence, right? The child knows before it can speak that sweet is not bitter. That it's the idea of something sweet here now. It's connected to those circumstances of time and place. the concomitants of real existence. And so although it's the idea itself is simple and would apply to anything sweet, the way the infant has it, it only attaches to one thing, the thing that right here now that's affecting it. And right, so the infinite first has these simple particular ideas as sensations or as memories. But either way, there's a determinate time and place attached to it. And like the infant or the beast, the non-human animal, is like these sensations and memories of simple particular ideas are always correct. Right, as Locke says, so this is jumping ahead a little bit of the reading, but it's book 2, chapter 31, section 2 on page 337. For if sugar produce in us the ideas which we call whiteness and sweetness, we are sure there is a power in sugar to produce those ideas in our minds, or else they could not have been produced by it. Right? Like if I'm right now somehow being caused to perceive the simple idea of whiteness by something, then I'm sure there's something white there. Right? I'm sure there's something white there now. And that's what the infant's idea is. And so it's like, its idea truly represents its object. Now the question is, oh boy, all right. It's so much better. I mean, it's disorienting, but it's so much better to lose a lot of time to good questions than to like go through without questions. So anyway, I mean, I think this explanation I just gave leaves over a question about why discernment, comparing, and compounding are necessary steps on the way to abstraction, as Locke seems to say they are, right? Because you might think that the infant goes straight from having the particular idea of something sweet here now, without comparing it or compounding it or anything, to just now abstract. Now I have the simple idea of sweetness or whiteness as it is just that appearance in itself, as he said in that paragraph, right? Separated from a determinate time and place. And that would be an abstract idea. I think I'm going to go back and say, well, maybe I better say this right now. So I think so roughly speaking, there's 3 different ways that the two ideas can go together. So like the first one is coexistence of their objects. So like this is something that happens with particular ideas. Like something is white and sweet. And so it causes me to perceive white and sweet at the same time. So I have white and sweet at the same time. The second way is involuntary association. Like in the past, white and sweet have often come together. Now I get white. And so I right away remember sweet. Um, we'll see that Locke is going to associate this way of ideas going together with madness, right? Like it's irrational. I mean, it's not, it would be different if I somehow reasoned that that they go together and therefore the other one should be here. That's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about an association that's formed by habit and that I'm just like subject to. So whenever I get one idea, I always get the other one. And I've been lying down here, but the last one is voluntary compounding. I take the two ideas and I deliberately put them together and count the combination of them as one. Right, so now existence and that other idea he mentions in that same paragraph, unity, attached to my new complex idea. Right, or as Locke says, this is book 2, chapter 12, section 2 on page 160. Complex ideas are ideas made up of simple ones. Well, yet are, when the mind pleases, considered each by itself as one entire thing and signified by one name. Right? It's when the mind pleases, this voluntary part. It's not because they happen to have affected me at the same time, and therefore I'm actually sensing and remembering at the same time. It's not because they came at the same time sometimes, and therefore without like thinking about it, I just get one when the other comes. It's because I deliberately decided to put them together. And I think Locke thinks of the process of abstraction um, as it involves transferring unity from this to this. Right? Like as long as I had a particular idea, um, uh, like the particular idea of Fred, the reason the ideas go together in Fred is because they're all tied to the same time and place. I sensed them together. But to make it abstract, I have to decide to continue putting them together even without that connection to time and place. And so like in the case of a complex idea, it's that clearly involves compounding, right? That is, I have to be able to, before I can do this abstraction, I have to be able to decide to put ideas together. That's compounding. Right? Because once I take away the particularity, there'll be nothing to hold them together except this, but this is madness according to Locke. Right? So there'll be nothing to hold them together unless I can voluntarily keep them together. So that's for a complex idea. What about a simple idea? So I think, I mean, I'm not basing myself on anything I'm aware that Locke says anywhere. So, right, so I'm going out on a limb here. But I think even in case of a simple idea, you still have to do something similar. That is, you have to decide to keep using this simple idea by itself not with any others. Right? You have to do that on purpose. At first, maybe the infant only noticed whiteness or sweetness in some situation. And so that was the only idea that came in. But to make the abstract idea, the infant has to take responsibility for that being the only idea. And so, although that doesn't literally involve compounding, it involves the same kind of operation of the mind. Okay. I guess I see skepticism again. All right. I'm, I'm going to press on because there's a lot left that I still want to talk about today. All right. So, so the first thing is the classification of simple ideas. And this is, I mean, I could spend a long time on this, but it's not worth it because Locke is going to go back and discuss the different types of the classification of complex ideas. Locke is going to discuss each of the different types of complex ideas in turn, and that's the time to talk about it more in depth. But I just want to draw up the whole classification, especially because there's something confusing about it. So, like ideas in general are separated into classified as simple or complex. And then under complex, he divides them further into modes, ideas of substance, and relations. So just roughly speaking, like a mode is just a bunch of simple ideas put together. An idea of substance is a bunch of simple ideas put together with and Locke says this idea, this is always somewhat confused or something, but with the thought that there's something that the qualities all inhere in that makes those qualities be together. That's the substance. And then, right, so like this is like the idea of a certain property, so to speak, whereas this is the idea of something that has that property. And then finally, relations somehow, I mean, it's not even clear why this relations seem like a really different type of thing than these. But Locke does consider them under complex ideas. And it involves, as Locke will say when we get to this, the mind somehow going beyond one idea towards another one. It's the operation of comparing that he said in our reading is like responsible for the whole tribe of relations. Okay, and then so under modes, these are divided into simple modes and mixed modes. And this is the confusing thing I want to point out, that a simple mode is not a simple idea. A simple mode is a type of complex idea. So this is an unfortunate choice of terminology. Also, the opposite of simple here is not complex, but mixed. Probably could have used some other word like, I don't know, pure or something, pure mode. Maybe that would have suggested something else. I don't know. Anyway, this is what he calls them, simple modes and mixed modes. And the difference here is supposed to be that in a mixed mode, the ideas you put together are all different from each other, right? Like white, cold, round, whatever. But a simple mode somehow involves the same idea put together with itself. Okay, and it's simple modes is what he talks about first, and that's therefore also what I'm going to talk about first. So, what's an example of a simple mode? I mean, there's three main examples, and then there's a chapter where he gives a bunch of other things that are supposed to be examples. Although I find those further examples really confusing. I have to admit, like why they're some of them seem similar to this and others seem really different, but I don't know. Anyway, the three main examples are number, space, and time. Or as he prefers to say, like number, duration, or sorry, expansion, extension, and duration. You know, I'm just gonna say number, space, and time thing. All right, so, I mean, number is kind of the easiest to explain here. How does this work? Well, so first of all, again, in the chapter on the different operations of the mind, up to chapter 11, he mentioned the operation that gives rise to these simple modes. So this is chapter 11, section 6 on page 154. Oh, there's 154. All right. um, um, well, yeah, so it's towards the end of section 6. Under this of composition, right? So section 6 is about the operation of composition in general or compounding. And then he says, under this of composition may be reckoned also that of enlarging, wherein through though the composition does not so much appear as in more complex ones, yet it is nevertheless of putting several ideas together, though of the same kind. Thus, by adding several units together, we make the idea of a dozen. And putting together the repeated ideas of several perches, we frame that of a furlong. So if you want to know how long a perch and a furlong are, you can read that footnote. I don't remember. Anyway, so there's some kind of units of length. And a perch is shorter, right? So the number example, like I said, is probably the easiest to understand, although it's not that easy to understand. I mean, we have one of our simple ideas is the simple idea of n units. Now, and apparently, I mean, you can tell this from the beginning of the number chapter. Apparently, this is the same as the idea of unity that comes together with every idea. Right at the beginning of the number chapter, which is chapter 16, he talks about how unity, first he says it's the simplest of all our ideas, which I don't understand because an idea is either simple or it's not. I'm not sure what he means by that. But anyway, he also says that it's the most universal. It comes with every other idea. So that seems to mean that the idea of n unit is the same as the idea. By the way, I also don't know how this was pronounced. Did they say n unit? Do they say n unit? I don't know. Anyway, so the idea of n unit is the same as the idea of unity we talked about before. So we have this idea, and we can repeat it. So like, right, we have the idea of units, and then we have it again, and then we have it again. And then, of course, to compound it, again, we have to take these all together as one thing. Which means that this idea of unit is going to attach to it again. From the outside, so to speak. Right? That is, a number is units repeated, and then all the repetitions taken together as one unit. So I said, like, this is relatively easy to understand. I mean, there's something weird. There's a number of things that are weird about it. I mean, the first thing that's weird is that, like, Locke he's literally thinking that the way you form an idea of a larger quantity is to form a larger idea. um, uh, but in what sense is, right, that's why the operation is called enlargement. But in what sense is the idea larger? Well, this idea unit has happened more than once. But what does it mean that it's happened more than once? Like, what is this dimension that I've drawn? It's not space. But it's something kind of like space in the sense that there can be two things that are like intrinsically the same as each other at different positions in it. Right? So, like, somehow this repetition, I mean, presumably it's not like space in other ways. Like, you can't like move these and like switch them or something. Right? But there somehow is room. That's what the operation of enlargement allows for. There's somehow a kind of room to repeat ideas and have them add up to each other. Okay, but so I mean, but leaving aside those kind of weird aspects of this, it's, you know, it's relatively easy to understand how you could say this is the idea of three. The idea of three involves the idea of unit, and the idea of unit, and the idea of units. But first, that's not enough. That's just thinking unit three times in a row. I have to add them up as all one thing. Then I have the idea of three. It's harder to understand how this is going to work in the case of continuous quantity like space and time. So, because the question is, what corresponds to the unit? So, like, at first you might think, and there is one place in the book where Locke seems to suggest this, but it seems so inconsistent with everything else he says about this that I'm not sure I understand that passage. But at first you might think that it works something like this. There's like a smallest possible space. That's the unit. And to get the idea of a larger space, we have to add a bunch of them up. So this actually literally is what Berkeley and Hume are going to say about space, or about our ideas of space, if those are different. But Locke doesn't believe this. Right? The one passage I'm thinking about, he suggests that maybe, I mean, even there he doesn't say anything like this. He just suggests that perhaps what's most properly thought of as simple in our ideas of space is our idea of the smallest space we can perceive. Right? But the smallest space we can perceive, like, that's not really a length that could be added together to get a perch or a furlong. Right? And as Locke himself says there, when he says, what is that? smallest space we can perceive. He says that, I forget what the number is, but he gives basically an angle. You know, he says it's about like 1 minute of arc in a sphere of which the eye is the center. Because like smallest, there isn't really a smallest space we can perceive, right? Like how small a space we can perceive depends on how close the thing is to our eye. Because there's a smallest angle we can perceive. So if things are really close to the eye, you know, they can be pretty close together and we can still tell them apart. But if they're really far away, they have to be much farther apart before we can do that. And I mean, this is obvious, right? People understand what I'm saying? This should be obvious. Okay. So this doesn't even seem relevant here. I mean, it will be relevant in Berkeley and Hume, but only because they, like Berkeley in particular, like doesn't think there is anything outside that we're looking at. So, right. So, but as far as spaces, you know, not our ideas, but spaces themselves, Locke says they can always be divided. Well, even that's not exactly right. He says space itself can't be divided, right? Because to be divided would mean to make two superficies, which is this word for surface, I think, to make two surfaces where before there was none, and you know, remove them from each other. And you can't do this with the parts of space, right? Like you can't take two parts of space and move them away from each other. Rather, what's divisible is body, right? And if you pay careful attention, like Locke, when he moves from talking about like infinite extendability to infinite divisibility, he stops talking about space and starts talking about body, because it's body that's divisible. Okay, but in any case, space is kind of divisible in the sense, and sometimes he talks about it as having parts, in the sense that, you know, you can fit a body with multiple parts into it. So, and in that sense, every space is divisible, right? Like every space, a body that fits into that space could be divided into two parts, according to Locke. Right? Because, and we already saw this last time, because according to Locke, divisibility is one of the qualities of body that the mind follows into the smallest pieces, even ones that are too small for us to sense. So every body is necessarily divisible, meaning every body can be taken apart into parts that are themselves bodies. And therefore, the body that fits into any particular space is divisible. And in that sense, every space is divisible, right? So every space in that sense has parts that are smaller than it. So there is no such thing as the smallest space, according to Locke. And I mean, according to most people, right? I mean, Berkeley and Hume are weird for claiming that space isn't infinitely divisible. They run, you know, they have a lot of, it's not an easy position to maintain. Right. So what Locke is saying is kind of commonsensical, right? There's no such thing as the smallest space. So how are we adding things up to get bigger spaces? And what is the simple idea of space? If it's not the smallest possible space. If it's not, that is, if it's not the idea of the smallest possible space. So I have an idea of a furlong, and I have an idea of a perch, and I have an idea of an inch, and I have an idea of a micron, and so on and so forth. but none of those is the idea of the smallest possible space, because there's no such thing as the smallest possible space. So none of those seems like a candidate for a simple idea, right? That is, all of those is like the idea of three, is the idea of something that already has parts. So I think the answer is that the simple idea of space is not a really small space. The simple idea of space is just like spaciness as such, prior to any limitation. Right, so it's the idea that all spaces have in common. What they all have in common, they're all space. That's the simple idea of space. And this has to do with why, like last night when I wrote this list of transcendental ideas, transcendental is not Locke's term, but it's my term. Existence, unity, and then I said maybe power and maybe limits. That so like, at least in the case of this simple idea of space, it never comes in by itself, but always what comes in with is always already a mode of it. That is, it's always space with a certain limit. So like, if you look at book 2, chapter 13, section 2 on page 162, I have showed above chapter 4, but I think this should probably say chapter 5. I've showed above that we get the idea of space both by our sight and touch, which I think is so evident that would be as needless to go to prove. And then this is what it's needless to go to prove. That is, this is how we get the idea of space by sight. That men perceive by their sight a distance between bodies of different colors, or between parts of the same body, as that they see colors themselves, nor is it less obvious that they can do so in the dark by feeling and touch, right? So what it is that men or human beings perceive by their sight is a distance between bodies. And this is the way the simple idea of space comes in. Yeah.
You mentioned in the last lecture, and as many other philosophers bring up, excuse me, air is often mentioned to have some sort of substance or body. So I'm wondering, is that like, he's using space in a very colloquial sense of like, there are two objects apart from one another. With this concept of like, you need to move it, and there's always going to be a body to replace it. Why is air not that body that just replaces the space?
Well, so like, when I say that we separate two parts of the same body, I mean, I'm abstracting that from, that is, I'm ignoring the question of what exactly is in here afterwards. But whatever is in here, it's not either of these two half bodies. Yeah.
Yeah. Like air, because I'm now thinking of like the air around us and about like outside and like things that are like, because it looks like, I don't know, something like floating, like something on the rocks. and that's fine. I think about air as it's like breathable air, or like is it not?
Well,
Air?
so first of all, I said, when I talk about, or when Locke talks about these two superficies being separated, he's not at that point asking about what is in between. But, so one question is, does there have to be another body in between? So it's definitely true that if one of the bodies around is air and you do this, you know, because of the type of body air is, it will flow into the space. And, you know, at the same speed as you move them apart. And when they're apart, yeah, there'll be a new body in the air that wasn't here before, air. That is a piece of air, right? So, are there circumstances where you move them apart and there's nothing left in between, that is a vacuum? So this is a big controversy in this period. Right? Like Descartes says that a vacuum is impossible. Aristotle had said that a vacuum is impossible. Locke argues at length that a vacuum is possible, and not only that, but presumably actual. His argument for why we can tell it's actual has to do with there has to be some open space for, otherwise motion would be impossible, which I'm not sure that's a good argument, but in any case, you know, Locke's mentor, Boyle, is famous for among other things, for inventing the air pump, right? And like, that's one thing that made this controversy take off. In that case, between Boyle and Hobbes, you know, when you pull back this sucker in the pump, so like at first he was touching this and then you pull it back. Does there necessarily have to be something in here afterwards, or can it be a vacuum? And you know, Locke is on Boyle's side, because a vacuum is at least possible. And so, like if you said, well, Locke, what about outside our atmosphere? Is there some even thinner body out here that moves? So he would say, well, maybe, but there doesn't have to be. And moreover, he thinks that body in general is finite, meaning that all the bodies in the universe stop somewhere. And outside of this, there's no more bodies. So even if space near us is not a vacuum, Locke thinks eventually you get to a vacuum. So I don't know, but am I answering both of your questions between this?
Empiricists what mass references.
I think he was talking about what we usually call air, right?
Sure, yeah, I mean, also thinking about the fact that like, it seems that space does not exist for Locke unless, or it seems that space doesn't exist for him unless a body is filling that space. So then this answers obviously that there is vacuum, there is other.
Yeah, so Locke argues extensively that a vacuum is possible. Yeah, so and against the Cartesian view that space doesn't exist unless there's a body there. Right, so, and even in the case where there is a body, we get the idea of space by concentrating just on this distance and ignoring the question of what else has moved in. So it might as well be a vacuum. And even if the body stays whole, we can consider the space that the body takes up by thinking only of this distance. And again, Locke says, how do we get the simple idea of space? Men by sight perceive a distance. So again, what comes in is not the simple idea of space, however you think about that, but the simple idea of space already modified by a certain limit. And then, of course, after that, we can start compounding. Right, so this is actually, this was not part of the assigned reading, although I think maybe it should be next year or next, yeah, I am teaching this next year, aren't I? But it's book 2, chapter 15, section 2, on page 187. The mind, having got the idea of the length of any part of expansion, let it be a span or a pace or what length you will, can, as has been said, repeat that idea, and so adding it to the former, enlarge its idea of length and make it equal to 2 spans or 2 paces, so often as it will, blah, 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 etc. Right? So like in this case, I mean, compounding is still compounding of units, but we have to get the idea of the unit. We have to get the idea of at least one unit directly by seeing a distance. It can't all be by compounding. Um, um,
I think we're out of time.
Oops, we're out of time. All right, so I will finish talking about space and also hopefully talk about infinity on Thursday and then go on from there. See you then.